Food is a basic that we all need to survive, yet millions of people are going hungry. In the 21st century, how is this still happening? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Enough food is produced to feed the world, but people are dying of starvation. Global warming and conflicts mean the problem is going to get worse. So, what can be done?
In 2000, world leaders set the UN's Millennium Goals. They pledged to end hunger by 2030. With 7 years to go, we are a long way off. Around 45% of deaths among children under 5 years of age are linked to undernutrition. And 238 million people are facing high levels of acute food insecurity. Burkina Faso, Mali, Palestine, South Sudan and Sudan are hunger hotspots of the highest concern. Palestine was added recently because of the war in Gaza. Rising prices of grain as a result of Russia's war with Ukraine significantly impacted low and middle-income countries globally. And extreme weather because of climate change is having a big impact on farming and crop yields.
About a third of agricultural land is currently degraded. You can imagine the potential of restoring a third of agricultural land in terms of food security, but also in terms of then building resilience, adaptation, and of course, mitigation of emissions.
Leaders on food security have been meeting in London. David Cameron, British Foreign Secretary, said at the Global Food Summit, "We can tackle this problem with innovation and technology. We are capable of feeding all the people on our planet. It can be done. We have the technology, we must bring it to bear." Climate change, inflation, food insecurity are all interconnected. Tackling one will improve the rest, but will action be taken before it's too late?
Well, let's bring in our guests. In Nairobi is Brenda Kariuki, the Senior Regional Communications Officer for Eastern Africa at the World Food Programme. In Edinburgh, in Scotland, is Peter Alexander. He's a Senior Lecturer in Global Food Security at the University of Edinburgh. Joining me from Bucharest is Cezar Gheorghe, Grain Trade Analyst and founder of AGRIColumn. That's a consultancy that provides services in agribusiness. And from Oakland, California, we have Frédéric Mousseau, Policy Director at the Oakland Institute. He coordinates research and advocacy on land investment, food security and agriculture. Great to see you all. Brenda, I'm going to come to you first. Please give us a situation report of what you're seeing on the ground in Africa right now.
Thank you for having me. So the situation in Eastern Africa right now is not looking really good in terms of food security. We have just come out of one of the longest and most severe drought in Somalia, a country that is now also at the front lines of a climate crisis, facing significant flooding that has displaced over 500,000 people. We have a situation where the conflict in Sudan is going on 6 months in. We have over 20 million people predicted to be food insecure right now and in need of immediate assistance. We have a situation where the global food prices continue to make food inaccessible for most people across the region. It is not looking good for food security. Children are malnourished. For example, in Somalia alone, there's 1.5 million children facing acute malnutrition. In Sudan, a similar number. Across the region, the situation is really dire.
Brenda, how does it make you feel when you're dealing with people and talking to families who don't know where their next meal is coming from?
It is heartbreaking. A lot of the people are in situations that are really desperate. You have people in camps that are dependent solely on food assistance from WFP and other partners in the humanitarian sector. Yet we are also in a season where funding is at its lowest. WFP, for example, at the moment is at only 40% of its required funding for 2023. We are so low on funding, we cannot reach all the people we need to reach with food assistance, with cash assistance, and the situation is really desperate.
Peter, I'll come to you. The figures are absolutely shocking here. Acute food insecurity is at a 5-year high. 238 million people now not knowing where the next food is coming from. How surprised are you at the state of the world right now in terms of food security?
I mean, I guess I'm surprised that, we had seen progress for the decade previously to those 5 years, but there's been a number of shocks that have damaged food security, as well as longer term trends, and obviously climate change being the major trend there, which makes it more difficult to produce the food that we need, particularly the impacts of extreme weather events that are becoming more frequent and more severe and damaging production. However, I guess the point I would like to make is that there is enough food in the world to feed everybody a healthy, nutritious diet. It's just we don't distribute that food very equitably. And people in the global north, we eat too much, rising obesity, but also we eat too many animal products, and so there's too many livestock, and we're using food and agricultural area that could have been used for humans to feed to livestock, and that's not a very efficient way of kind of producing a nutritional balance that we require from the food system. So there are I wouldn't say I'm surprised, but there are ways that we have to sort of square the circle of kind of a more sustainable food system that provides the outcomes that we're looking for.
Frédéric, one phrase that has popped up already in this conversation is climate change. How significant is this in terms of food production around the world?
Well, what the IPCC has said, and what all of us, everywhere we are, anywhere we are, can see by ourselves, is climate change has really resulted is more intense and more frequent extreme climatic shocks, which result in people losing their crops, in people being displaced by flooding, all kind of disasters like this, which are part of this, the causes that WFP is dealing with in addition to wars. So it's critical in every part of the world. For the poorest, it's especially all those living on the razor edge in their day-to-day livelihood. It's a matter of survival today.
And Frédéric, the issue of resilient crops, how much is that going to be a player in the future? Crops that are resilient to climate change?
It is key, but I would say it's not just crops, because we are told, we need this magical climate-resistant rice or maize. But the key to deal with resilience, and the key to bring resilience, is diversification, is avoiding large monocrops, but being able to plant diverse crops, rely on different cultures, so that you don't rely on one crop that if it fails, you just done for everything. So we've been told a lot that there will be some magic seeds, but we should not rely on magic seeds. We should rely on diversification, on crops that are well adapted to climate, to the local environment. We've seen in Southern Africa, for instance, regular droughts with maize, but maize is not a traditional crop, and if it is monocrop in Southern Africa, it relies a lot on the rain, and the rain is erratic. So the key for dealing with these droughts is not to find the magic maize, is rather to complement maize with trees, with pulses, with all kind of tubers and other plants that will ensure food security along the year.
Cezar, I come to you finally. You're a grain expert. The war in Ukraine provided and still provides a huge global shock in terms of food production. What's your reading of the situation? How big an impact did the war in Ukraine have on food production in the last year and a half?
Well, I need to confess the truth and nothing but the truth, that the Ukrainian crops reach very good volumes despite of all the fears on the beginning. For example, the wheat crop reached 22 million tons. The corn crop reached roughly 31 million tons. So according to those numbers, they're in line with, let's say, average a year in the past. Also, sunflower seeds, they reach a very good crop this season, 14.5 million tons. So the problem is not the volume, the flows, where they could step out from Ukraine. But with sorrows, we saw that in the past with the grain, let's say Black Sea Grain Initiative, that most of the corn, most of the grains reach European Union instead to go in the African countries and the other countries that might need those products. This was the problem. Right now, the situation is, let's say, stationary because there are a lot of flows, Ukrainian flows that cross through different channels and they load in Constanța port in Romania. Also, the solidarity lines are flowing also, but in this moment, we can't foresee any future deterioration regarding these flows. There is, of course, there are problems on Sulina Strait, on Băstroie Strait. There is a crowd of barges and vessels in next to Musura Bay in the Black Sea. But at the end of the day, Constanța port could handle, and it handled till now, roughly 50 million tons this season.
So, Cezar, your understanding of it is that Ukraine is still producing vast quantities of food. It's the infrastructure that the Russians have targeted and the logistics of getting that to its locations. That's where the issue is.
Yes, that's correct. Logistic and the cost of the logistic. And moreover, I will add that Ukraine struggle indeed, because in the moment that Russia bombing the Danube ports, Ren and Ismail, they run with the goods in Odessa. When they bomb the infrastructure in Odessa, they run back in Ren and Ismail. The logistics are constraints. The Black Sea, it used to be a wild sea during the winter. We might have a lot of problems due to winds, due to, let's say, storms and maybe blizzards this winter. But at the end of the day, yes, it's not about volume, it's about logistics and the cost of logistics.
Brenda, when we talk about conflict around the world, people think of the war in Ukraine, Israel's bombardment of Gaza. Sudan in Africa has not been in the headlines in Europe for months now. And I would imagine the food situation there is deteriorating every week.
Absolutely. So the conflict in Sudan is still going on. It's not making the news, as you said. But the challenge in the country right now is there's so many people that are in need of assistance. We have over 3 million people displaced within the country and more outside, and we can't reach the ones especially in the country. For example, our access to places like Khartoum, where the conflict still rages on, and parts of Darfur are very limited because of the insecurity, because of the fact that we're not able to securely get commodities to those parts of the country. And that conflict is also having an impact across the region. The number of people moving and leaving Sudan, going into South Sudan, a country already fragile and desperately in need of additional assistance and funding to feed the huge number of refugees that are flowing into South Sudan is critical. Chad, on the other side of the border as well, is receiving a lot of refugees from Sudan, and the amount of food and finances required to meet these needs is not matching the needs. It's extremely volatile, it's extremely desperate situation, and a lot of these women and children are showing up in some of these camps really malnourished and desperately in need of their next meal.
And Brenda, just tell us what impact the war in Ukraine has had on African countries dependent on that grain.
So WFP has in the past, when the Black Sea Grain Initiative was in place, imported significant quantities of grain that have come to this region. We were lucky before the end of the grain initiative this summer to have already procured what we needed for 2023. But the challenge is if the grain from Ukraine is not reaching the global markets, the price of food, even here in Eastern Africa, is significantly high. So what we were able to procure as a daily ration or basket of food for people, the prices tripled or quadrupled in some of these markets where the commodity price globally is affecting even our local markets here.
Peter, I want to ask you about world leaders. Who's taking this seriously and who's not, in your opinion?
Well, I think we could all be taking it more seriously. Obviously, there's the COP 28 is kicking off very shortly, and the food system and sustainability of the food system will be discussed there, as it should be. Also, there is the biodiversity COP and the agreement of the Convention for Biodiversity, which is related through protected areas, taking out land that could be used for agriculture. But one of the things that I'd like to sort of draw upon that's been discussed so far is the war in Ukraine, and obviously the loss of exports from Ukraine is a concern. But I think the other route for sort of impact on the global markets has been through the fertilizer price, which we saw tripling in 2022, and obviously the whole all global markets have largely sort of gone back to some sort of normal level. But that sort of dramatic increase in agricultural inputs, both fertilizer and of course fuel and other forms of energy, directly impacts food prices, but also indirectly impacts them through farmers making decisions to grow less, use less land, or perhaps use less fertilizer on the land that they are planting, and that has a sort of an indirect consequence on food prices as well. So I think there are indirect, if you like, routes to sort of food insecurity that resulted directly or indirectly from the war in Ukraine.
Frédéric, if you were speaking to leaders at the COP summit, what would you say to them? What do you think the most pressing issues are in terms of addressing this with solutions?
I would say a lot of things. First of all, it's just completely unacceptable to have the numbers we hear from the World Food Programme and the shortfalls in terms of funding. You have to have in mind that the USAID budget for food assistance, and USAID is the main funder of WFP. It's $6.7 billion a year. The US at the same time spent 121 times more on military, on the weapons and the military. So it's really a matter of priorities for the leadership to see what to do. And when they spend these amounts, 800 something billion on the military, they spend $1 billion on climate adaptation at the same time in the US. So it's really where we put the priorities, and we need absolutely people's pressure on our governments to shift priorities. We can't just put all this in the military or whatever oil industry. We need to tackle climate change, and we need to tackle world hunger. And we can do that at the same time. That's a good news, because we need to invest in agroecology, in diversification, in support to small farmers. There's plenty to do. It's just a matter of political will and putting some money on the table that at the moment is really ridiculously not there.
Cezar, that's a very good point, isn't it? All these governments, they've no end of money when it comes to buying weapons and arms and fighter jets and artillery shells. But when it comes to addressing something as simple as having enough food for every human on Earth, the budgets just aren't there.
Yes, indeed. We saw also with sorrow here in Europe that we have a main, let's say, occupation to be green. But these, let's say, European leaders forget completely that the world is not composed by European Union and maybe USA. It's composed by Africa, Asia, and other poor countries or poor regions on the world. Besides of this, also, I will add the fact that right now they saw and they somehow try to repair the last year and a half when we kicked the signals, we raised the flags about what kind of corruption and evasion it's in Ukraine. And right now they changed the laws in Ukraine. They created total mess out there, because if you want to export something nowadays, you need to be registered in an exporter list. You have to have all the documentation in place, and the maximum time limit for let's say for being accepted by these new laws, it's between 45 and 60 days. That lead also on in delays regarding shipment. I will add on this topic also the fact that the World Trade Organization need to address and to put also on the table not only amounts or other organs, not only amounts for the food. They need to build up upstream, let's say trading chains, because otherwise they will be strictly linked by the companies that they operate on this sector, by the traders, and the traders, as we know, all of us, they're just looking for profit and nothing more. And whatever it's convenient or not for everybody, the food it's for all the people, not converted into profit and to fill the pocket.
Brenda, I know you're worried about funding. If the money doesn't come through at the required level next year, just spell out for us, what will that mean for people on the ground in Africa, families who are desperate already?
Oh, I think the thought of it already just gives me nightmares. It basically means we will have to reduce significantly the rations we give people who are most vulnerable, which is something we've already had to do this year because we already only have 40% of the funding we need to run our full operations in 2023. So imagine a family that is in desperate need of food having to reduce their monthly rations from 100% to 70%, which we've done this year in most parts of the region. And that will have then to significantly be reduced to maybe 50%. We're talking about basically giving people 1 meal a day instead of 2 meals a day, which is what in some places they are doing now, because we can no longer provide 3 meals a day given the shortfall in funding.
You do extraordinary work, Brenda. How does it make you feel inside when you know that those food parcels next year are going to be even smaller?
It's gut-wrenching. It's absolutely killing me because a lot of the people who desperately need this food, it's children. There's 3.6 million children, for example, who are malnourished in Sudan alone. If you look at Somalia, 1.5 million children malnourished. They need this food to survive. And we're looking at a situation where if they don't have the meals they require, the nutritious supplements they require, you're looking at people moving from hunger to potentially starvation. And that is not something you want to even fathom because it is absolutely unacceptable.
Peter, you're in Scotland. I think a lot of our international viewers will be very surprised to know that in the United Kingdom there are 2,200 food banks. These are places where vulnerable poor families can go and get a ration pack of food to help them out. We've got very serious issues in the UK as well.
Yeah, I mean, food poverty is a global issue. Obviously, you know, in sub-Saharan Africa, it's much more acute, but it does affect all parts of the world. So yeah, it's true that the cost of living crisis, as it's often termed here, is biting very hard, and that's a combination of food prices and energy costs. You know, to return a little bit to the question you were asking before, the focus you were asking before about policymakers, I do think we need to be careful just to not sort of other the sort of requirements to sort of take action here, and that, you know, it's a little bit down to all of us to think about how we consume and what we consume, and that does collectively have a big part to play in achieving a kind of a more efficient, a more sustainable, and ultimately a more equitable food system. So we can't just leave it to policymakers to take action. We kind of need to take action ourselves. And one of the actions we can take is sort of supporting policymakers, you know, in some of the actions that they might consider. You know, I'm thinking here about, you know, taxation and subsidies related to the food system.
Frédéric, that's a very good point, isn't it? We all have a part to play in solving this global problem.
Yes, definitely, and we need to look at the overall capitalist system we live in. We've been talking about Ukraine, but who is dominating today the grain from Ukraine is a handful of large corporations who set the prices, who do all the deals, and there's a problem when our food systems are more and more concentrated in the hands of some corporate powers and their investors, shareholders, BlackRock, and so on. So we need to definitely look at food and agriculture in a different way, not like any commodity. You don't buy food like you buy a car or TV. It's essential for the survival of us all. And our policymakers have to make this exception and have to give preference to the people and to the most marginalized in particular, and not just let the largest corporations just keep multiplying their profits over a food crisis. And unfortunately, what we have seen over the past few years with this huge increase in food prices has led to massive profits for a number of corporations and their shareholders, while people are really counting the meals they're going to eat. So this is, again, not acceptable, and this is something we need to ask our leadership. We need to deal with food differently, and we can't just let it be to the market forces that will do good for us.
Frédéric Mousseau, Cezar Gheorghe, Peter Alexander and Brenda Kariuki, thank you all. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me and Brady and all of the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.